With the recent announcement of Metal Gear Solid Master Collection Volume 2, the Metal Gear community has been buzzing. The fan base has been celebrating Metal Gear Solid 4 Guns of the Patriots finally escaping the PlayStation 3 prison after 18 years. For the first time, the entire Solid Snake saga will be accessible on modern hardware, and that is huge. But within that celebration, there's also confusion and a little bit of frustration. When the list of games for Volume 2 was revealed, fans were surprised by how small it was. We are getting exactly 3 games: Metal Gear Solid 4 Guns of the Patriots, Metal Gear Solid Peace Walker, and as a bonus content, Metal Gear Ghost Babel. That is significantly way less than what we got in Volume 1. Volume 1 had 7 games: Metal Gear, Metal Gear 2 Solid Snake, Metal Gear Solid, Metal Gear Solid 2, and Metal Gear Solid 3. And as bonus content, the 2 NES games, Metal Gear and Snake's Revenge, plus the digital graphic novels for MGS1 and MGS2. That was a stacked collection, so seeing Volume 2 with only 3 games feels light. And honestly, it feels wrong. Naturally, people start asking questions. Where is Rising? Where is the Twin Snakes? What about the PSP games? Why do we get only 3 games when Volume 1 had 7? And the answer is actually pretty simple. Metal Gear Solid 4 ate the entire budget. I have talked about this in previous videos, but to summarize what I said, unlike the games in Volume 1, which can be ported fairly easily, MGS4 was built specifically around the PlayStation 3's cell processor. That architecture is extremely unusual. To get MGS4 running on modern hardware, Konami had to essentially rewrite large portions of the game's code so it could run on a standard x86 systems. That alone is a huge technical achievement, and realistically, that probably consumed most of the Volume's 2 development budget. And you can even see this reflected in the pricing. Volume 2 is priced at $50 for 3 games, compared to Volume 1, which was initially $60 for 7 games. Yes, there's a $10 difference overall, but that difference doesn't really reflect what we are paying per game in Volume 2. This strongly suggests that Metal Gear Solid 4 took the majority of the budget for Volume 2. And based on my calculations, we are effectively paying $30 for MGS4, $20 for Peace Walker, and Ghost Babel is essentially free, included as a bonus content if you purchase the entire collection, just like the bonus content in Volume 1. So imagine this. If Konami had added Rising Revengeance, the Twin Snakes, and the PSP games on top of MGS4, this collection would easily hit $70, and Konami knows they can't sell a collection of 15-year-old games for $70 without massive backlash. People were already angry when Volume 1 was announced at $60, and that had 7 games. So Konami had 2 options: make Volume 2 expensive, or make Volume 2 smaller, and they chose smaller. And that led to the big assumption: oh, Konami must be saving the rest for Volume 3. But the more you actually think about it and break this down logically, the more Volume 3 starts to look a lot less likely than people think. And just to be clear, I am not saying Volume 3 will never ever happen. What I am saying is that when you look at the remaining games in the series, the argument for Volume 3 becomes very questionable. Before we go any further, we need to talk about the real purpose of these master collections. Because once you understand why Konami is doing this, Volume 2 and the Volume 3 debate make a lot more sense. And that purpose can be summed up in one word: preservation. More specifically, preserving the mainline Metal Gear games made by Hideo Kojima. There are 8 core Metal Gear games that Kojima has created. The games are Metal Gear, Metal Gear 2 Solid Snake, Metal Gear Solid, Metal Gear Solid 2, and Metal Gear Solid 3. Those 5 games has been featured in Volume 1. Then we get Metal Gear Solid 4 and Metal Gear Solid Peace Walker, which will be included in Volume 2. Then all that left is Metal Gear Solid V, which include Ground Zeroes and The Phantom Pain. Although they are 2 separate games, they are technically one story, so for the rest of the video I will consider both of them as one game. Those 8 games are what Kojima considers as his definitive Metal Gear saga. He mentioned that in a 2015 interview with IGN, that the games he personally directed are part of his definitive Metal Gear experience. Anything outside of that, spin-offs, remakes, side stories, alternate versions, does not count as part of that core saga. And this isn't just Kojima's opinion. Konami themselves have been reinforcing this idea as well. In an episode of Metal Gear Production Hotline, the series producer Noriyuki Okamura showed this picture which have the 8 core Metal Gear games. Every time preservation is discussed, he points to the same lineup. That's what Konami is focused on preserving. Not spin-off, not remakes, not experimental side games. Those can still exist, but only as bonus content, just like Volume 1 and Volume 2. So when we talk about what belongs on these master collections, we are really talking about this list, the Kojima-directed saga. And that means only one mainline game is still missing, Metal Gear Solid V. Which brings us to the Volume 3 question. If preservation of the core saga is the priority, Volume 3 would only have one true mainline game left to include. And that's where things start to fall apart. Let's list every Metal Gear game that hasn't been re-released yet. Metal Gear Solid V, Metal Gear Rising Revengeance, Metal Gear Solid The Twin Snakes, Metal Gear Solid Portable Ops, Metal Gear Acid 1, and Acid 2. Look at that lineup. You have one mainline game, one character action spin-off, one remake, and 3 PSP side games. See how messy that is? So let's go through them one by one, starting with Metal Gear Solid V. This is the last Kojima-directed Metal Gear game. If Volume 3 exists, this would logically be its main attraction. But here's the problem. Unlike the previous Metal Gear games made by Kojima, MGS-V is by far the most accessible game by him. It is available on PlayStation 4 and Xbox One, which both can be played on PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X/S through backward compatibility. And it is also available on PC through Steam. It is too modern, it still runs well, it's still sold digitally, and it's still widely available. From a preservation standpoint, MGS-V is already preserved. It doesn't really need a Master Collection release the way MGS4 or Peace Walker did. That makes MGS-V a terrible anchor for a Master Collection Volume 3, especially when you can buy the definitive edition, which includes Ground Zeroes and the Phantom Pain during a Steam sale for about $12. The only platform that doesn't have MGS-V is Nintendo Switch. So instead of anchoring a whole Volume 3 around it, it makes more sense for Konami to release it as a standalone Switch port. MGS-V was originally a PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360 title, so technically it can run on a weaker hardware with enough optimization. There's also the reputation issue. Let's be honest, MGS-V still carries baggage. A lot of fans still associate it with unfinished story, cut content, and Kojima's messy split with Konami. So imagine Konami announcing Metal Gear Solid Master Collection Volume 3, and the main attraction is Metal Gear Solid V. The reaction wouldn't be a celebration, it would be controversy. Why this unfinished game is the centerpiece? Why are we paying again for this? Why not Rising or Twin Snakes instead? That's not the kind of marketing headache Konami wants. The game is in a weird place. Too modern for preservation, too controversial to headline nostalgia, and already available everywhere. Which makes it a terrible foundation for a full Volume 3 collection. And that leads us to the next obvious candidate people bring up, Metal Gear Rising Revengeance. This is the game everyone brings up when talking about Volume 3. But Rising has two big problems when it comes to being part of a Master Collection. First, it is not a mainline Metal Gear game. It is a spin-off. It plays nothing like the rest of the series. It is a character action game made by Platinum Games, not a stealth game made by Kojima Productions. It is not built like Metal Gear Solid at all. So thematically, it already doesn't fit the idea of preserving the core saga. Second, its release history is weird. In the West, Rising Revengeance came out on PlayStation 3, Xbox 360, and PC. But in Japan, it was a PlayStation 3 exclusive. To this day, it did not get a release to any other platform. In July 2024, Konami released Metal Gear Rising Revengeance on PC via GOG, but accidentally made it available in the Japanese region as well. I am not entirely sure if this was the Japanese version of the game being released on PC, or simply the Western version being sold to the Japanese market. Either way, Konami panicked and quickly removed the game and refunded everyone who purchased it. Later, during an episode of Metal Gear Production Hotline, Konami's promotion director Jiro Oishi publicly apologized for the mistake, and then said something really interesting. He spoke about and hyped up Konami's relationship with Platinum Games, and said he hoped the game could eventually be officially released for Japanese players. However, there is no news on that front at the moment. This extremely tells me that Konami is planning something bigger, which strongly suggests a standalone remaster is way more likely than being bundled into Volume 3. And honestly, that makes way more sense. It has its own fan base, its own identity, its own gameplay style, and its own commercial value. Konami would make a terrible mistake if they decided to bundle Rising Revengeance as part of Volume 3. It would actually undersell it, and that game is too popular than that. Rising is the kind of game that can sell by itself. Being remastered, 60 FPS or maybe 120 FPS, high resolution, meme popularity, and it has a very strong combat system. It makes much more business sense as a standalone remaster than as a filler in a Volume 3 collection. Which leave us with the most legally cursed game in the franchise, Metal Gear Solid: The Twin Snakes. On paper, this feels like the easiest win imaginable. It is a remake of MGS1 with MGS2 engine, with better controls and new cutscenes. It feels perfect for a modern collection. But this game has one huge problem: Nintendo. Although Konami published the game, it was funded and co-produced by Nintendo, and developed by the now defunct Silicon Knights, who were contracted by Nintendo to develop it specifically for the GameCube. And my friends, we all know Nintendo. They are extremely protective of anything they fund. When Nintendo puts money into a project, they treat it like their own IP, even if the brand technically belongs to someone else. Just look at Bayonetta, an IP owned by Sega and developed by Platinum Games, a third-party company. Nintendo funded both of its sequels, and to this day, they remain exclusive to Nintendo platforms. Now compare that to Metal Gear Solid: The Twin Snakes. Nintendo funded it, Nintendo co-produced it, and it was built specifically as a GameCube exclusive. So ask yourself realistically, why would Nintendo allow the Twin Snakes to appear on PlayStation, Xbox, and PC for a Konami collection they don't control? There is no business incentives for them to do that. The only two realistic ways the Twin Snakes ever comes back are as an exclusive content for the Nintendo Switch version of the Master Collection Volume 2. Maybe we will get an announcement in a Nintendo Direct sometimes around this release window. Or as part of the Nintendo Switch Online program, the same way other Nintendo-funded titles are preserved. But as part of a multi-platform Master Collection Volume 3? That's almost impossible. Could it still happen? Maybe, if Nintendo leadership is generous enough to allow it. After all, the wonderful 101 was published by Nintendo in Wii U in 2013, and later released on other platforms as a remaster in 2020. But honestly, I don't know, man. I don't think that's going to happen. So keep your expectations low. There's also another problem: relevance. Konami already preserved the original Metal Gear Solid in Volume 1. So from a preservation point of view, Twin Snakes isn't necessary. It is interesting, it is controversial, but it is not essential. And that makes it a very strange candidate to headline a Volume 3. Which leave us with the last group of games people bring up, the PSP games: Portable Ops, Acid 1, and Acid 2. On the surface, these seems like easy additions. They are small, they are self-contained, they feel like perfect bonus content for a Volume 3. But technically, they are a mess. First problem: resolution and UI. These games were built for a tiny 4-inch PSP screen. The menus, HUD, and text were all designed around 480p handheld viewing. Sure, you can bump up the resolution, but everything else stays the same. The UI looks blown up, the text looks awkward, and the layout feels wrong. To make them look decent, Konami would have to redesign the HUD, the menus, and parts of the interface, which already pushes these projects closer to a remaster, not a simple port. But the real problem with these games is the frame rate. let's focus on Metal Gear Solid Portable Ops for a moment. The game runs at 20 FPS. Guess what happens if you try to raise that to 60 FPS? This happened. The game logic is tied directly to the frame rate. That means if you increase the frame rate, you also increase the game speed. And since the game runs at 20 FPS, if you try to increase it to 60, you are not just doubling the speed of the game, you are tripling it. You can test this out by yourself if you play it on an emulator. It is basically like playing the game with a fast forward option turned on. To fix that, Konami would have to dig into the source code, reverse engineer the original code and manually separate the logic from the frame rate, then rebalance the game systems. That's not a collection work, that's a real development work. It is a full remaster work. Pause here for a second. While I was finalizing this video, a friend told me that it is possible to play the game at 60 FPS without speeding it up. All you need to do is to download a specific version of a PSP emulator, enable a 60 FPS cheat, then start the game and drop from an elevated place. For some reason, this corrects the game speed and allows it to run at 60 FPS. It is very strange, but it does work. Keep in mind, I was only be able to test it for about 2 minutes, so I don't know if other mechanics in the games are affected by this method. I just wanted to clarify that it is technically possible with enough optimization. Now, back to the video. So ask yourself, is Portable Ops really worth that struggle? The game isn't even canon, and it isn't recognized as part of the 8 core Metal Gear games directed by Hideo Kojima. Now, there's another option. Just emulate the PSP version as is, the same way the NES games and Ghost Babel were handled. Simple, old-school emulation. But then you are stuck with low resolution, low frame rate, and visuals that look rough on modern screens. Which goes completely against what the Master Collection is trying to do. Make these games feel preserved, not cheap. And that's why the PSP games are in such an awkward spot. They are too technically demanding to casually bundle into a Volume 3, but not important enough to justify expensive remasters either. A much more realistic option is to release them through the PlayStation's PSP Classic program, not as part of a multi-platform Master Collection. So after looking at everything left, there's actually no clean, logical lineup for a Volume 3. Which brings us to the big question. Does Volume 3 even make sense? Let's recap what's left if Konami were to make it. Metal Gear Solid V, the only true mainline game still missing. But it is already playable on modern consoles and PC, and from a preservation standpoint, it doesn't really need to. Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance, a popular spin-off, but thematically it doesn't fit the Master Collection at all. And realistically, it makes way more sense as its own standalone remaster than as a part of a bundle. Metal Gear Solid: The Twin Snakes, completely trapped by Nintendo's funding and publishing restrictions. That makes it almost impossible to include in a multi-platform collection. And then you have the PSP games. These would require serious technical work to look and run properly on modern hardware, which pushes them closer to a full remasters, and that's expensive and time-consuming. When you line it up all like this, Volume 3 wouldn't feel like a carefully curated Master Collection. It would feel like a grab bag of leftovers. One modern mainline game, a spin-off, a Nintendo exclusive remake, and a few handheld titles. The entire point of the Master Collection is to preserve Kojima's core saga on modern hardware. Volume 1 and Volume 2 already did almost all of that work. So for Volume 3 to exist, Konami would have to stretch that definition and start forcing in games that don't fit thematically, don't need preservation, are technically difficult to port, or are legally blocked. From a business and preservation standpoint, it is just not worth it. In my opinion, what makes more sense is this: platform-specific release for MGS-V on Switch, a standalone remaster for Rising Revengeance, Nintendo-only options for the Twin Snakes like Switch Online or exclusive Volume 2 content, and digital or emulated releases for the PSP titles. So yes, while a Volume 3 isn't completely impossible, the reality is that a true Master Collection Volume 3 with multiple mainline games is extremely unlikely. Konami has already done the hardest part, preserving the core saga. So, in conclusion, when people ask, is Volume 3 coming? I think the better question is, what would it even be? Unlike Metal Gear Solid 4 and Peace Walker in Volume 2, none of the remaining games make obvious sense as part of a Volume 3 lineup. And that's why I don't think Metal Gear Solid Master Collection Volume 3 is guaranteed. Based on how Volume 1 and 2 were structured, it might not even be planned at all. And if it does happen, it would easily be the weakest of the three. But if it never happens, that doesn't mean Konami failed. It just means the Master Collection already did what it was meant to do: preserve the core Metal Gear legacy. Now that you have watched this video and learned about the issues each game has, let me ask you this. Do you think Volume 3 will happen? Or do you think Volume 2 is the end? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you for watching and have a nice day.